Welcome to the April 2025 edition of the Nashville Power BI User Group. If you haven't joined us for a couple of months, you might say, wait a second, your name looks different. We decided that even though we aren't hating on Excel, we felt like it was time for a bit of a branding change because a majority of our focus now is on Power BI and Fabric as a group and less of a focus on Excel, although we are still open to discussing Excel things and still think that that's an important tool in the BI landscape. We have shortened our name a bit to more align with our focus. And we've got a full agenda today, some announcements. We'll open up the floor here in just a moment for anybody who may be looking for a job or have a job opportunity available at your company. Since this is the first meeting since FabCon, wanted to take a moment and recap what is a long list of announcements that got made this year at the conference, as well as talk about what's new in Power BI, Fabric, and Excel. There is some overlap there. And then we'll get to our feature presentation with Antone and Liam. They're going to talk about data project meltdowns and just talk about different factors that go into that. I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot and have a good time in that presentation. But before we get too far, we hit a milestone here in the last couple of weeks, and that on Meetup, our group now has 2,000 members. And so we wanted to acknowledge that. That's a big deal. I remember hitting like 700 or something after we joined the group, and thought we were big time, but it's really cool to have the reach that we have. And so it's worthy of a bit of a dance party to celebrate that. So I'm not going to make you get up and dance right now. But if you feel the need to, be released to do that. We do have some meetings coming up next month. On Thursday, May 15th, Miranda Grant is going to join us and talk about Power BI Directory, how she's implemented that within her company and how that ended up actually solving some big issues that their company was having. So that meeting is live on Meetup. You can RSVP to that. We'd love to have you join us. And then in June, in lieu of a traditional Meetup style like we're having right now, we're actually going to be joining with all the Nashville data user groups and having a data summer social. So that's going to be an in-person event. There's still a few details that we are ironing out. We're nailing down the time, but we do know it's going to be Thursday, June 5th at the Tailgate Brewery here in Nashville. It's a virtual meeting. That will be an in-person gathering. And hopefully all of you in town can come and join us, hang out with a bunch of other data nerds, Power BI people, data engineers, all kinds of stuff. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. Hopefully you can join us. And we are always looking for folks to come and present. Right now, we are booked through July. And if you are interested in presenting to the group, we welcome speakers of all experience levels, all different types of topics around Power BI, visualization in Power BI, all kinds of Fabric stuff. So if there's something that you want to present on, feel free to scan the QR code or visit our Sessionize page to submit your topic. And we are glad to work with you and make it happen to share your knowledge with us. Wanted to make you aware of some other events going on around Nashville and the region. So next week is a full week of data meetups in Nashville. Data Science is meeting on the 21st. That's on Monday at 6 p.m. at Tech Hill Commons, the MTC headquarters. Dr. Yorgos Askalidis is going to be talking about data science and tech product teams. So that's going to be a really cool presentation. If you're in the data science space, you'll definitely want to check that one out. Then on Tuesday at 6 p.m., Cassandra Simmons is going to be talking about curbing cognitive load. So this is really part of the data nerds, brilliant women in data, but I don't think that meetup is just limited to ladies. I think I saw a couple of guys as well on the RSVP list. But if you're interested in data visualization, understanding how good design practices can be implemented into the data world, you're not going to want to miss this talk.
Michael, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
So Just to go back to the slide with Cassandra. So I've known Cassandra for quite a few years, and I haven't seen her do this talk, but I have seen her do other in the past. She's a fantastic presenter, so I really encourage people to check that out.
Yeah, very good. And then if you haven't had enough meetups on Monday night and Tuesday night, you can join the data engineering group on Wednesday night next week. They're going to be meeting also at Tech Hill Commons. And the very speakers that we've got today will be presenting there and just discussing more about Fabric and some of the challenges that come along with it being a very new platform. So if that's something of interest to you, you can join them on Wednesday night at 5:30 at Tech Hill Commons. Couple of other events happening within kind of a day's drive or so of Nashville is M365 Community Days in St. Louis. So this one isn't explicitly a Power BI, but they will be touching on Power Platform topics. So I'd be surprised if Power BI does not come up there. But that is a free event at the Microsoft office in St. Louis. SQL Saturday Jacksonville is coming up on May 3rd. That will be at the University of North Florida. Registration is open for that, and it's only $15, including lunch. I have not personally been to this event, but everybody that I've talked to who's ever been to this one says it's a top 10 of SQL Saturdays. So if that's something you're into, this is supposed to be a great event. SQL Saturday Austin is also that same day. Maybe if Austin is more of your flavor than Jacksonville, you can check out this event. Looks like there was some really good sessions at this one. I didn't see the Jacksonville lineup, but there was some good stuff at this one in Austin. The Microsoft 365 Community Conference is coming up May 6th through 8th. That's going to be at the MGM Grand in Vegas. All kinds of different options. Not quite as cheap as a SQL Saturday, but again, lots of different Power Platform conference and how all that relates back to Microsoft 365. Nashville AI Week is also coming up. That's May 14th through 16th. That's going to be held at the City Winery here in downtown Nashville. More information on their site. Registrations are open for that. And it's going to be a few days of all kinds of different AI topics. So be a really exciting week and a good one to join if this is an area of interest for you. May 17th is SQL Saturday Raleigh. That's going to be at Duke Health, actually in Durham. Again, looks like a pretty good lineup at this one. So check that one out in Raleigh. And then Michael McKinley will be hosting his Modern Power BI training on June 7th. You can scan that QR code or visit the link to learn more about it. This is a paid event, a paid training. But if you or somebody in your organization is looking for some Power BI training, Michael's an excellent teacher, knows his stuff. They will certainly take a lot away from this training day.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get to do this training. I did the Microsoft training about a year ago. This is actually my own content. I updated it for a slightly more modern take, incorporating a little bit of AI, some best practices from some of the work that I've done. Another training is really excellent. This is just sort of taking it to another level. It is introductory, so if you know anyone who's looking for some introductory training, definitely scan the QR, click that link, reach out to me, you can email me, I can provide the link, and I'd love to see you guys there.
Thank you. Also coming up in June, down in Chattanooga, will be the Scenic City Summit. So this is a conglomeration of all of the different tech conferences that were happening in Chattanooga. They said, hey, we got a lot of different things going on, like 3 or 4 of these. Why don't we just combine it all into one event? And so this will be a 3-day summit, workshops on the 19th, conference then on Saturday the 20th, and then a hackathon on the 21st. Registration hasn't quite opened for this one. The call for speakers just ended, so we would expect to see a lineup, schedule, and some registrations to open up soon on this, but looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of different topics from app development to UI to UX to data, all kinds of different stuff. This will be a fun event that you'll want to check out real close to Nashville. think this is the last one, but wanted to make you aware that later on in the summer, August 14th and 15th, the Nashville Innovation Summit is returning for this year. It's going to be at the Music City Center. Call for speakers on that one is currently open and closes on the 29th. And early bird pricing on this one goes through May 10th. So if you're an NTC member, it'll be $550. Not an NTC member, it's $660. So pretty reasonable price here for 2 full days of learning. And it looks like they're going to do a slightly different format this year, some shorter presentations. So should be a lot of great learning opportunities right here in downtown Nashville at this one as well. FabCon this year was just chocked full of announcements. In fact, there were so many that there's not enough time to demo stuff. There's too many cool things. So a couple of things that I want to highlight though is that I've, as we've been seeing across all Microsoft products, right? AI Copilot is getting deeper into the products, but there is a lot of agentic AI stuff going on and some pretty interesting things with this Azure AI Foundry and being able to actually kind of build your own chat agents. You want to check out their blog for a little bit more on that. But along those same lines, probably what I think was probably one of the biggest announcements of the week is that Copilot is now going to be available for all Fabric SKUs. So previously, you had to buy a pretty large Fabric capacity in order to be able to leverage Copilot, but that limitation has now been removed. And so if you're paying for Fabric, you are now able to use Copilot with Fabric. There's also a new command line interface that has been written. So if writing scripts and in the command line is your thing, this is a great announcement. Lots of exciting CI/CD enhancements as well on the platform. Variable libraries got introduced as a CI/CD enhancement. That's actually what I was thinking about demoing. Variable libraries actually will have a broader scope than just CI/CD. So think of it as an object within Fabric where you can define and store variables and reuse them across different elements of whatever you've developed in the platform. A lot of initial use cases for that within data pipelines, but there's also some way of utilizing those stored variables within notebooks as well. More to come on that. I think that's going to be a nice enhancement for folks doing a lot of engineering here. Along those same lines, user data functions have been announced. Basically, user data functions, same kind of thing that we've been used to having in SQL Server, where you can define a function and then call that function, reuse all the code across other stored procedures or whatever. Same kind of concept now is available in Fabric. So you can store functions, call them from your notebooks, call them from your pipelines. Again, it's going to be a really nice enhancement for reusability across the platform. Call your attention to some updates in data flows Gen 2. So incremental refresh is now generally available, as well as the opportunity to save your Gen 1 data flows as Gen 2 data flows. That one's actually in preview. And CI/CD support is finally available for data flows Gen 2. That one's actually been popping up if you've been working in Fabric for 3 or 4 weeks now. But when you create a Gen 2 data flow, it gives you that option. Hey, do you want to create it the old one, or do you want to create a CI/CD data flow? So that is now available. Copy job is now generally available. There's also a new auto scale billing option for Spark as well. Having that auto scale option looks like it's going to be a pretty interesting way for you to kind of keep costs under control and let it scale up and down as you're running different pipelines and notebooks throughout your platform. A couple of other things that I think are worth noting is that we now have or are about to have the ability to edit a direct lake semantic model from Power BI desktop. So that means that if you've got a semantic model that you've built in Fabric, that you want to have kind of that golden model, if you will, that gets used across your organization, you don't have to go into your browser anymore to make changes to that semantic model. We're all very used to doing our modeling work in Power BI desktop. And so now we can have that modeling development workflow that we're used to, but have the ability to change those direct lake semantic models. I think that one's going to be a little bit more of a game changer for us than the attention that it got that week. A couple of other things that actually did not come out. These last three bullet points did not come out during the keynote that week, but Marco Russo actually introduced these or talked more about these in one of his sessions that week. We will soon have the ability to build a composite model between a direct lake source and an import source in Power BI desktop. So I think as that one gets out there a little bit more, that to me would be a pretty interesting topic intent for somebody to present on. So also there's a new concept in DAX called calendars. And this one, again, game changer. So how many folks work on a calendar in your organization that's not a standard calendar, a fiscal calendar or a 445, something like that? Seeing a couple heads shaking. Yeah, we do too. So this calendars and DAX option is going to allow you a way to tell Power BI what that fiscal calendar looks like and open up the use of the traditional time intelligence features in DAX. So I think that means that the greatest formula in the world, Rob Colley's old kind of pattern for getting around that limitation and writing custom time intelligence, that one may be dying, but it's also going to mean that time intelligence is much faster to write. So that's going to be really cool. And not only are UDFs going to be available in Fabric, but there are going to be, I don't know, he didn't really say when this one was coming, but UDFs are going to be available in DAX. So you'll be able to write code in DAX, save it as a function, and call it from other DAX measures or such. So some pretty cool things happening there. So a lot of the new features that have come out in the March edition of Power BI kind of tie back to some of those announcements, but plenty of cool things coming out there. And again, a lot of the new Fabric updates really tie back to those announcements, but a lot is getting released right now in this space. So going to skip forward a couple of new Excel features too, but I did not update that slide. Sorry. I got so into these announcements that I was telling Michael and Sekou, like next year, we just got to do a whole presentation after FabCon on all the new stuff. So I got so into that I didn't even finish it in the slide deck, but we're going to turn it over to Antone and Liam. So guys, take it away.
Hey, everybody. So today, Liam and I are going to talk about data project meltdown. So when data projects go wrong and what issues we run into and sort of how to resolve them. So we're looking at both technical problems, but also non-technical problems that can lead to data projects failing. So we'll do a brief introduction. We'll talk about project management pitfalls that can really derail a data project, and then really common technical limitations we've seen, and then issues with prioritization, and then finally go into source control.
So Antone and I have quite a few years working together in different organizations. I had a lot of app dev experience that led me down the data path many years ago. And then I eventually crossed paths with Antone, and he's been neck deep in data and BI from the beginning. So we really hit it off. And one thing we noticed as across multiple organizations are some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And it's actually what brought us together to join up and start Pathfinder and try to actually correct some of those issues and have a voice regarding some of these things that we've seen in different organizations that really create bottlenecks and obstacles.
I guess the big thing is we've seen data projects where you have talented people, then consultants and a bunch of resources poured into one project. But we've noticed if the process is broken, there's certain issues that are dysfunctional. No amount of resources is going to fix it.
Yeah. And some of these things are going to seem very straightforward and like obvious. But believe me, there's definitely cases where it's not obvious to some folks in some organizations. And we've seen things in certain cases just completely flip upside down due to some of these things we're going to get into today. And it's alarming when you're in the thick of it. But once you step back and try to have more of a meta mindset about it all and kind of see it from a 50,000 foot view and start identifying the patterns, it kind of helps you tactically maneuver around these things, and raising the awareness keeps it in the back of your mind. So as you navigate through some of these challenges, that gives you, you're just better equipped to move through those issues as they arise.
So first thing I'm going to talk about is project management. So big like thesis to start out with. We truly believe that modern project management was not made for data teams, and we're trying to fit in tools and methods that were made for other companies and other contexts, and this leads to a lot of problems. So on the far left, I've got Kanban. Kanban system, you've probably seen Kanban boards. It's sort of at the root of a lot of current modern project management workflows. So it was originally created in World War II in Japan, and they were using it for manufacturing where their supply chains were super constrained. And it worked well for airplane manufacturing, and it worked well for car manufacturing. And you're manufacturing the same sort of thing over and over and over again. Six Sigma, and I use Jack Welch, who's the CEO of GE. It started in the 80s with Motorola, and it became the project management technique to use in the 80s and early 90s. Again, it was manufacturing focused, and you're looking at manufacturing defects. So they were trying to take a statistical approach to manufacturing. And a lot of Kanban and Six Sigma, you'll see referenced in a lot of project management literature. Agile. So the Agile Manifesto came out in 2001, and it also came out of an Agile Scrum series of meetings in the late 90s. But the basic premise with Agile and how they were looking at software development is you'd have rapid iteration with feedback from external customers. So if you were like programming stuff in 1998, like you're thinking like web dev, and you put something out, the customer gives feedback, you make changes quickly, which is sort of a different paradigm than BI and data, because we're looking a lot of the time internally. And then finally, I put a picture of Marissa Mayer at Google. So she sort of started the concept of product teams. So she started Google's product team and product methodology. And the idea is to have a team that is in charge of what was originally like Google search, like a tech product. This is where where management decisions and later project management are run through. And I think this approach, like for most BI projects, we're not actually working on it like set project like Google search, or Atlassian's using it, or say Netflix. And I actually think product techniques plus Agile, it kind of screws things up, because instead of looking at customer feedback, you're looking at an internal organization feedback, and things can get messy pretty quickly there. So really common problems we've seen. So requirements gathering. So a lot of organizations, they don't really trust the developers to gather requirements themselves. So it's almost like an illusion. Like we pretend, oh yeah, you guys are the nerds. You can't do any talking to humans. We're going to hire someone to talk to the people. And I think that's really backwards. And I think we found that when teams succeed the most is when developers are able to gather requirements and talk to the teams, like especially for front end, like creating a Power BI report. Like I made up this number that it's 60% discovery, but I really do think it's mostly discovery and talking to people. Once you develop the clear requirements and have a picture of what the report's supposed to look like actually executing it is pretty straightforward. And if you don't do that and you're not doing the front end discovery, you end up iterating in the back. So you're still spending all this time on discovery. And one common problem we've seen is sprint velocity numbers. So there's a huge incentive to make it look like your sprint velocity is higher than it is. And especially when you have not technical managers, it's really hard to hold anybody accountable. So you don't know how long projects actually take, and there'll be paths that would actually be faster and simpler, but could have someone overstating how long this versus X will take. So it's really hard to plan things optimally. And then finally, big issue with project management is a lack of focus on who the customer is. Agile was focused on customer feedback, and that meant the person clicking on the website in the end. But with the Power BI report, it's really hard to know, like, if the term customer even makes sense, because you're using reports that could be used by operations or IT or finance, and they might not be externally facing. Here you'll run into a bunch of prioritization problems, which I'll cover later. So I basically went into the solutions, but one thing we found to be super handy is we'll use iterations on the front end, so report building, but the data engineering work has to basically be waterfall. So Liam and I spend a lot of time on the front end looking at their system capabilities, like thinking about the architecture and talking, not iterating that much on the front end. So we've seen really bad cases where everything's run through agile sprints, and you'll have issues where they're trying to change things or reprioritize tasks. It'll be multi-month tasks. So you basically have to bake in the back end work and build from there. And so requirements gathering, we're big believers in developer-led requirements gathering. Developers need to know the business. The sprint velocity numbers, I think it's critical to have a technical manager, like a manager who knows how long things take. Otherwise, you're just relying on the team, which I know it sounds bad to not want to trust like developers' time estimates, but like we've got kids and families and other stuff. Like we have a incentive to overstate the numbers and do something else. And then the who is the customer part. If you can figure out who the customer is, you have to have some sort of tool to taking customer feedback and figure out what's angering them or what they want changed.
All right. Another series of issues that we've encountered while implementing different data projects is technical limitations. Main areas where technical issues tend to come up from our experience. And this for me personally, this transcends even into the app dev world. I'll see this in, data focused stuff, but also software focused stuff. Those key areas would be unforeseen compatibility issues with products, a poor code base, scalability issues, and infrastructure networking. This is, pretty straightforward. Infrastructure networking is a big one. I'm sure everybody on this call has probably encountered some sort of issue with that in the past. Typically with compatibility issues, we see problems integrating different products unexpectedly. So whenever you're trying to move into a new platform or integrate a new product, we obviously, everybody here is a big fan of Fabric. We're a fan of Fabric too. We've implemented Fabric in a couple of different organizations, and we try to keep up to speed with what's going on and what's changing with it, but also what some of the common issues are with it. That's one factor that it's easy to overlook when you see all of the reports and all of the videos and all of the talks and stuff where we're getting into the nitty gritties about the benefits and all of the cool features and everything. But once you actually try to execute and implement the product, you may run into issues that slow down your productivity or slow down your ability to execute due to oversights, right? So within Fabric, it could be something like subtle UI changes, data integration challenges, things that require a lot of experimentation to kind of hammer out the kinks. And the drawback with that is when you spend more time focusing on experimentation, it slows down your ability to develop rapidly. And then it also slows down your ability to support and recover if there's issues rapidly. Where it really helps is to just get as familiar with the project as possible. Sandboxing is crucial. Product, not project. Sandboxing is crucial. You want to make sure that you can get through and play with features in a safe environment. But in order to do that successfully, you have to have a scenario, right? Some sort of test scenario that you can simulate actual business and production facing requirements and necessities. And this leads into the project management side of things, where in order to have an accurate test scenario, you really need buy-in from your product team and from stakeholders, right? Because they can outline some of these things, and it creates a more collaborative environment where everybody can come together and really hammer out any possible kinks before trying to roll something in production or before selling something to the business and getting everybody's buy-in, and then having 2 months worth of delays due to some sort of unforeseen issue. For code bases, this is pretty straightforward. We've all definitely experienced this, but this is something that has just baffled me for years, where either you inherit a code set that's just not been curated and matured correctly over the years. Maybe there was a revolving door. Maybe there was lack of expertise in certain areas. And so the way some of your code bases are put together is very sloppy or inefficient. You run into performance issues, things like that. Typically what happens is if the results are accurate and usable by the customers, then what happens is you create a dependency on that poor code base and it can't go anywhere. So then whenever you inherit it, the simple tasks like, oh, hey, can we add this field to this object or to this report or this, that, and the other? What seems like a simple request to your product folks and even the end user sometimes is actually a little bit more complex due to the nature of some of the technical stuff underneath the surface. What does it take to make the model change that will support the request? In order to do that, do we need to do any integration work? Do we need to change any integration processes? How are we computing some of these things? Is adding 1 or 2 fields going to increase your runtime for that particular stored procedure call or query? If so, how much? What are we willing to accept? What are our thresholds? These sorts of things. There's a lack of benchmarking that comes into all this. And then that creates a lot of technical overhead that can lead to further issues. Networking and infrastructure changes, or challenges. That's something that we've all encountered before. We've seen simple, hey, we've got a Fabric environment and a couple of in a Azure SQL database and a resource group in our tenant that we want to be able to talk to our on-prem data center, but our integration runtime host that we use for ADF isn't, jiving. It's not playing with both ways. Can you make a firewall change or networking change so that way we can communicate openly? And what seems like a simple task can turn into a 4-month-long delay or blocker due to lack of expertise on different teams. It shifts that responsibility over to another team and creates a blocking scenario. And then from there, you're on standby because there's no progress being made due to a lack of expertise or whatever is the calls on their side. So with that, the way we've been able to work around that is to actually, this ties back into some of the stuff I just mentioned before, team collaboration, where you got everybody kind of sitting down at a round table and talking these things through and talking openly about it. And it can't be boiled down into one 30-minute conversation or one 60-minute conversation. It may need to be a series of conversations over a certain amount of time while we're trying to do some sandboxing and testing these things out. These are sort of common sense approaches as solutions to some of these things. But like I said, when people are under the gun or there's bad leadership or lack of alignment, you see a lot of these challenges not only arise, but become serious detractors for productivity. So the overall solution is just try to sit down with everybody, stress test everything, sandbox, and plan it all out.
So going to jump into prioritization. And I think this is the source of a lot of evil with data projects going wrong. So we tried breaking down prioritization problems. So problem 1, I call it rational selection. So in a perfect world, we're assuming that teams are going to naturally identify and prioritize tasks aligned with clear objectives. And this also assumes hierarchical clarity, which means that there are clear objectives, that you have like a CEO coming up with a clear vision that goes down to a CTO, that goes down to a data team and is well structured and not messy. And you're also assuming that most organizations are doing efficient task sizing. So this is assuming that a team is going to allocate their resources and focus or due to their importance rather than due to other issues, which we'll go into a second. And then finally, like companies are kind of assuming that they have systems alignment, which means there's feedback loops that are ensuring that prioritization is aligning with strategic objectives. And as we're about to see, that's actually really rare for a company to act like you'd theoretically expect it to act. The best case scenario is you have teams consistently selecting tasks clearly aligned with their clear organizational goal. But what we have seen like most often, and I'm sure you guys, this is regular state of things, its priorities are influenced by politics, urgency, and availability. So you could have a BP trying to make a name for themselves, and they're trying to churn out a bunch of reports to show the board. And they're louder and more charismatic, and someone who might actually be adding more value. And then the worst case is everything's personal agenda. There's no overreaching strategy. And this is really sad because if you're at worst case, no matter how good your developers are, you're really hampered and it's going to be really hard to succeed. And then hierarchical clarity. So I think companies think of themselves as like clean or charts with really clean structures and working top down, and everybody knows what to do. There's clearly communicated strategic objectives, but and in most cases this sort of exists. So there's high level goals, but it's kind of vague and people don't understand how they're supposed to fit into each goal. So you'll have different like marketing teams and sales teams. Like you don't get what you're supposed to prioritize as a BI team and who you deliver to. And then worst case is there's no clear, it's not even clear what the organization does. There's conflicting priorities. One area where things can get really bad is like right before an acquisition, when companies know that it's going to be sold off and they're just kind of trying to sustain themselves or get ready to flip everything. Or if you have really poor executives, like there's a lot of companies in Nashville that are in this worst case scenario. And again, it makes it really hard to succeed. So efficient task sizing. So the reason I picked this dress, could be blue or it could be gold, is just to illustrate that a lot of focus can go into really stupid, meaningless things. Like BI and dashboards, we've gotten stuck. I've been stuck on like what shade of blue something should be, and had meetings with VPs and executives about like really meaningless things, whereas like key measures and metrics sort of get ignored. So the best case scenario is your resources and time go and match the importance of each task. And the most common case, which I think is where most of us will live, is like the tasks are largely prioritized by how loud their sponsors are. Or one interesting thing Liam and I've seen is, to an extent, a company will only use data as efficiently as it has to. If there's a company that's like low margins, super competitive, if they use data wrong, then they go bankrupt. Like they're kind of forced to move up to the best case scenario, versus if it has super high margins and they're able to make money and be dysfunctional, they'll tend to be dysfunctional. And then worst case scenario is everybody's focused on trivial tasks and you're not ever focused on vital projects. And then systems alignment. So this means that like you have real feedback loops of what's important and making sure that the BI team is designing for the marketing team because the marketing team is helping the sales team and everything's looped together. And so best case scenario, these loops are clear and exist and tied to strategic objectives. Most commonly it's distorted. And like we found there's a lot of really important feedback that happens with after work conversations, like running clubs or drinks on Thursdays. And you realize that this group on this team is having this issue that could have been helped by this other team. So a lot of the time it's really informal. And then worst case scenario, which we've sadly seen, is the loops are broken and nobody's listening to each other. And like for a BI team or a data team, you're stuck in the middle and you're providing information. And if what you're building on is structurally broken, it becomes impossible to succeed.
So another issue that we've witnessed that can contribute to everything we're discussing right now is source control and how the lack of maintenance can lead to critical scenarios themselves. One thing that we've seen is no version history, right? So we've all probably been in situations where there's absolutely no source control whatsoever, not even a Git repo, not even a folder on a shared drive where files are living. And you're kind of managing this all on your desktop. When that's the environment, there's no way to track changes. There's no way to see, if something changed, why and when, lack of notes and code, things of that nature. That all creates useful context for developers and engineers as we work through these challenges. And it also creates context for us to use when doing feasibility assessments to provide the feedback that would drive sprint and sizing conversations and prioritization conversations, et cetera, et cetera. This also affects team collaboration. You run into scenarios where people are stepping on each other's toes. You've got one guy working on claims data procedure that's making a change on line 500, and another guy's making changes on line 1258. But since you don't have proper source control set up, there's a really high probability that they're going to override each other's changes. That's something I've seen occur even in environments that had really robust source control implemented. I think that a lot of our versioning platforms have come a long way. So I don't think that as long as you've got something in place and people are using it correctly, you can typically navigate around that. But when you don't have something, or you have something that's being, halfway maintained or halfway utilized, you're going to start seeing this happen where not only are your changes getting overrode in source control, but then they're going out to production. You've got features being reverted, things of that nature. Creates a huge mess of confusion and intricacy that's hard to recover from. One thing that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about source control in this context, but given the current state of ransomware and all sorts of vulnerability exploitations that we've seen in the news and in the region as of, within the last year or 2 years, I've firsthand been part of those sorts of scenarios where source control alone saved entire companies. That plus one set of database backups from 3 weeks ago that was found literally in a closet in a data center on a hard disk. If it were not for those things, the company itself would have ceased to exist. These are things that are crucial to not only your ability to develop rapidly and execute, but it's also crucial for disaster and recovery. If the worst case scenario plays out and your environment's compromised and you have to build from scratch, source control is going to come in pretty handy. And the more robust it is, the better it's going to be because you're going to have all of your details and nuances accounted for, right? So something to keep into consideration. A lot of folks think that source control can be super basic or only concentrated on one area of code. I think that the more you can implement from a code standpoint, infrastructure as code, everything, the more that it all needs to be versioned. It all needs to be tucked away somewhere in case of worst case scenario. In conclusion, there's a series of human factors, technical factors that contribute to some of these project meltdowns as we outlined it. Human factors could be as simple as too many stakeholders not being able to agree, team misalignment, and the inability to prioritize, the agile death spiral, as we discussed, where you're iterating on the wrong things and it's just continuous sizing conversations, sprint plannings that never actually result. Or you could have the scenarios where you got C-level folks or VPs with ulterior motives who come in based on their own perceptions and kind of, either implicitly or explicitly derail progress. You got your technical factors that include poor code sets, performance implications, infrastructure issues, things of that nature. And as we just discussed, source control. And the overall solution and workaround that we found with any of this is to just plan. If you sit down and try to align your stakeholders and actually try to have prioritization discussions and then do proper sandboxing and evaluation of new products and new approaches, you're going to drastically reduce the possibility of unforeseen issues arising. The value, the return on your investment of sitting down and just planning things out as much as possible, the time spent doing that is going to have it's going to be invaluable in the long run. It's going to help your team rapidly develop and also execute a little bit more. I know I keep repeating execution and rapid development, but those are the two key things that this affects directly. One thing that I used to always say in the past was the question around a solution should not necessarily be, can it be done? Rather, it should be, should it be done this way? with that, I think that all of these things intertwine and influence each other and sort of carry that theme across the board. Software projects versus data projects, there's a lot of similarities, and it's really easy for people to just kind of force everything in the same lane, force everything in the same methodology. But as we all know here, there are nuances and there are different differences between the two that require different solutions. Sometimes you need custom solutions. And that's essentially the core thesis that we're trying to convey here. So I think that's all we have. We will be at the data engineering meetup next week, as outlined earlier. And we'll be discussing some of the basic challenges we've experienced with Fabric and just how it affects and impacts execution. We're a big fan of Fabric, so I'm glad that it seems like this is a good group to discuss that in. And we're excited to talk more. So feel free to reach out. You can hit us up at our website, and we'll be around hanging out here. So that's all we got.
Good stuff. Thank you, guys. What questions do you all have for Liam and for Antone?
That's one thing I actually told Antone. I was just like, man, this is going to be kind of a buzzkill. That's why we went with the Meltdown sort of theme to highlight the seriousness of some of this stuff, because we've all been in these situations and some organizations are better off than others. And I think that we're in phase where there's a lot of organizations and teams and individuals, myself included, going through growing pains with, new approaches and new methodologies and things like that. So it's like the calm after the storm. It's coming. We're just getting through the storm, so to speak. So I think it's kind of that's my optimistic twist at least, silver lining.
We're also big believers of focus on the downside, and the upside takes care of itself.
Plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah, and you plan for the worst well enough, and it's smooth sailing, computers off by 5, weekend with your family. That's the goal.
Michael, you had a
Michael?
question.
Yeah, that was all a little too real. I guess I have a couple sort of better questions for you guys. One is around sort of what you've seen in terms of best practices around scoping, time estimation. I know like strict agile practices are difficult in analytics and BI. I'm wondering if there's a happy medium in there somewhere, or if you've seen other practices that have been successful.
What you can scope out, a world where you're building out a super robust model and a clear model, mostly in SQL, and then you're able to quickly build reports on top of that. So like you can scope out the building of the one unified model, then building out the reports, which is harder to scope out, becomes easier.
Yeah, it's almost like approaching estimations in phases, and it's really hard to get buy-in from, very agile influence folks, because they want to force you to operate within the confines of their perceptions of this. But if you can get the buy-in from them to meet in the middle on taking it in iterations, okay, there's 3 main phases that we have to look at this as. We can scope this phase out. Let's do this first. So that way we can, get to a stable point there before we make any guarantees on the other stuff. Because ultimately they want to look at 6-month timeframes, right? They're wanting to pull reports and say, hey, we've got, the next year, here's how it's planned out. Here's what our roadmap looks like. When everybody's trying to be more collaborative, even on, something as basic as scoping and estimating, it really helps in the long run. But there's a lot of individual sort of user challenges that come with that. So it's more of a social construct than anything. I hate to say it. I mean, I hate to admit it, I guess, but it's really the one thing that's been most effective. It's the 20% rule always helps. If you're getting too much pushback from the other side, you give your best estimate plus 20. And then that way, worst case scenario, you deliver early. I've seen some people rely on that a little too much as a strategic mechanism, and that's how they do everything. And it's almost an unspoken rule on the engineering team that that's how you scope everything out and spec everything out. And that becomes problematic because if you start to overscope things, then you're running along. It just makes it look like you're not actually capable of delivering faster than you really are. So it's a balancing act more than anything, I think. So it's a challenge for everybody.
I'm curious how people are approaching source control with Power BI. I've seen the new feature of being able to save these things as PBIP files, I think they're called, which are textual in nature and not binary. That sort of permits us to integrate them with Git. And we're going to experiment with doing some automated pipelines with DevOps using that function and that feature. Curious if other people are doing this. Is this kind of becoming standard? Are we on the right track, or is there something else we're missing?
And this is like newish for the past 2 years, but the TMDL file and source control really makes it so you can properly use source control and merge changes and see what you're doing with Power BI. Like before, there used to be hacky workarounds where you had to unzip the file and it was a giant JSON blob and you could run into merge and deserialization issues. And a lot of the work they've done in the past has been also with analysis services, which had source control. And I think that's why the analysis services, or that was a huge benefit of developing tabular models rather than doing it in BI. But I think TMDL is the way, like finally creates the capability and we can finally do it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Michael. I mean, I think some of it is so new, it's hard to have a definitive answer on it, but having the TMDL view on the modeling side and then these PBIP files to handle more of the front end side is going to be a game changer. But I'd be interested to kind of hear how your experiments go. And on your particular use case, I'm going to be running those on our end probably in the next year or so as well. So be nice to compare notes on that.
Yeah, we're just getting started. I'll report back. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks. I'd mentioned before I was going to give you guys a link in the chat, which I'm doing now. So here's one to the notebook gallery, which is very much, if you've used the old gallery, it was basically like a report gallery, and the name is slipping my mind, but it was basically a way you could share your Power BI reports for the community to look at and interact with and be influenced by essentially what's going on here with the notebook gallery. And one thing that I neglected to mention earlier, with Microsoft's 50th anniversary being this year, they're giving away 50,000 free certification exam vouchers. So if you're interested in taking DP 600 or DP 700 in the fabric space, you can learn more in that second link about how to get one of those exam certification vouchers for free and what needs to happen to be able to do that. Our future meetings in next month on May 15th with Miranda Grant talking about the Power BI directory, and then our data summer social on June 5th. So thanks for joining us today, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, and Liam, for a great presentation. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you again soon around the community.
Thanks, guys.